BMP-1, the Soviet infantry fighting vehicle through the eyes of an American weapons expert. Introduction. When Western analysts first laid eyes on the Soviet BMP-1 during the late 1960s, the reaction was a mixture of shock, fascination, and unease. Here was something the United States and its NATO allies had never seen before, an armored vehicle that was not just a troop carrier, but a fully armed infantry fighting vehicle capable of engaging tanks, fortifications, and enemy infantry, while carrying a squad of soldiers into battle. To appreciate the significance of the BMP-1, we must place ourselves back in the Cold War. Western armies at the time used vehicles such as the American M113, lightly armored, unarmed beyond a machine gun, and meant only to transport infantry safely to the battlefield. The infantry dismounted and fought on foot. The vehicle stayed behind. The BMP-1 turned this concept upside down. With its low profile, heavy armament, and amphibious capabilities, the Soviet Union introduced a machine that fused the role of transport with that of a frontline fighting system. From an American weapons expert perspective, the BMP-1 was both a revelation and a threat, one that forced NATO to rethink how it equipped and deployed its own mechanized forces. Origins and design philosophy. The BMP-1 was conceived in the aftermath of World War II and the early nuclear age. Soviet planners anticipated that future wars in Europe would unfold on a battlefield saturated with nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. Infantry would need to stay inside their armored vehicles for protection, and those vehicles would need to fight alongside tanks in fast-moving operations across the plains of Central Europe. The result was revolutionary. Armament: a 73mm 2A 28-Grom smoothbore cannon, a coaxial 7.62mm machine gun, and a launcher for the AT-3 Sagger guided missile. Capacity: able to carry a squad of 8 soldiers who could fire their weapons from inside through firing ports. Protection: steel armor capable of withstanding small arms fire and shell fragments. Mobility: fully amphibious, able to cross rivers without preparation. For the Soviets, the BMP-1 represented a seamless blend of infantry and armor, a tool for mass mechanized assaults across Europe. From an American perspective, however, the most alarming feature was the BMP-1's anti-tank capability. No Western APC carried anything like the Sagger missile. Suddenly, every Soviet mechanized infantry squad was a potential tank killer. Firepower. The BMP-1's main gun, the 73mm Grom, was short-barreled and low velocity. By Western standards, it was not particularly accurate, especially at longer ranges. But the Soviets designed it to engage NATO infantry in cover and to destroy fortifications with powerful high-explosive shells. The real sting in the tail was the 9M14 Malyutka, NATO AT-3, Sagger missile mounted above the gun. With a range of up to 3,000 meters, the Sagger allowed infantry to strike at NATO tanks long before those tanks could respond. For American tankers in the early 1970s, this was deeply concerning. Suddenly, mechanized Soviet infantry could threaten the M60 tank, something no Western APC could claim. This forced NATO to accelerate the development of its own infantry fighting vehicles, most notably the German Marder and, later, the American M2 Bradley. Protection and survivability. From a U.S. expert standpoint, the BMP's armor was always a compromise. At 13 to 19 millimeters thick, it could resist small arms and shell fragments, but was vulnerable to heavy machine guns, autocannons, and, of course, tank fire. Even more worrying was the internal layout. The fuel tanks were integrated into the rear doors, and ammunition was stored throughout the vehicle. Western analysts quickly noted that this made the BMP-1 dangerously prone to catastrophic fires and explosions if hit. In later decades, combat in Afghanistan, Chechnya, and the Middle East confirmed this vulnerability. Still, the Soviets considered this acceptable. The BMP-1 was never meant to be invulnerable. It was designed to be fast, low, and numerous. Survivability was based on speed, numbers, and overwhelming offensive action, not on heavy armor. Mobility. The BMP-1 was powered by a 300-horsepower diesel engine, giving it a top speed of about 65 kilometers on roads. Its most remarkable feature, however, was its amphibious capability. Without preparation, the BMP-1 could swim across rivers using its tracks as propulsion, aided by a small trim vane deployed at the front. For Soviet strategy, this was crucial. In a war across Central Europe, rivers and waterways would be constant obstacles. The BMP-1 eliminated the need for separate bridging units for every crossing, allowing mechanized formations to maintain momentum. From an American viewpoint, this was both impressive and concerning. The U.S. Army relied heavily on engineering units for river crossings, while the Soviets designed their vehicles to simply swim. This difference in philosophy reflected the Soviet obsession with high-speed, deep operations. Battlefield performance. The BMP-1 saw combat in numerous conflicts, and its performance was mixed. Yom Kippur War, 1973, Egyptian and Syrian forces used the BMP-1 against Israel. While its missile capabilities surprised Israeli tank crews, the vehicle proved highly vulnerable once engaged by tanks and aircraft. Soviet-Afghan War, 1979 to 1989. In Afghanistan, the BMP-1's vulnerabilities became clear. Its thin armor was no match for RPGs, mines, and ambushes. Soviet troops often preferred to ride on top of the vehicle rather than inside to avoid being trapped in a fiery death if hit. Chechnya, 1990s. Again, the BMP-1 suffered heavy losses in urban combat, reinforcing the view that it was underprotected for modern battlefields. From a U.S. perspective, these wars validated earlier concerns. The BMP-1 was revolutionary in concept, but limited in survivability. It worked best in the kind of fast, open-field warfare envisioned for Europe, but in guerrilla or urban environments, its weaknesses were fatal. Strategic impact. Despite its flaws, the BMP-1 forced NATO to adapt. Its introduction directly inspired the creation of the infantry fighting vehicle category in the West. The German Marder, the British Warrior, and the American Bradley all owe their existence to the BMP-1. The vehicle also symbolized Soviet military philosophy: mass production, offensive firepower, and integration of infantry and armor into a single mechanized fist. Even if each individual BMP-1 was not the best protected, the sheer number of them, tens of thousands produced, made them a central element of Soviet doctrine. American assessment. From my standpoint as a U.S. weapons analyst, the BMP-1 was both a breakthrough and a dead end. It broke new ground by combining transport and firepower into a single platform, but its compromises in protection doomed it in actual combat. It taught us in NATO a critical lesson. Mechanized infantry cannot simply be passengers. They must fight alongside tanks, and their vehicles must have the weapons to do so. But it also showed us that survivability cannot be sacrificed in the pursuit of firepower and mobility. The BMP remains a milestone in armored warfare history. To Soviet designers, it was the future of mechanized war. To American analysts, it was a wake-up call that reshaped NATO doctrine. And to the soldiers who rode in it, it was both a shield and a coffin. Even today, many BMP-1s remain in service across the world, a testament to the design's influence and the Soviet Union's industrial reach. But for all its innovations, the BMP-1's ultimate legacy may be as a reminder that the balance of firepower, protection, and mobility is never easy to achieve, and that every design reflects the doctrine and strategy of the nation that built it.